December 17th, 1944. 05:30 hours. Honsfeld, Belgium. The Tiger tank's engine coughed once, sputtered, and then fell completely silent. SS Obersturmführer Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the turret hatch, the metallic clang reverberating through the frigid pre-dawn air. His driver, Unterscharführer Werner, twisted the ignition again and again. Nothing. The 700 horsepower Maybach engine refused to roar back to life. Outside, the ground was frozen solid, the early morning mist clinging to the forest edges and the hedgerows like a spectral shroud. The fuel gauge rested stubbornly on empty. From below, Werner's voice cracked through the tense stillness, tight with rising panic. "The reserve tank's dry too, Herr Obersturmführer." Peiper climbed down from his command tank, his boots crunching on the hard Belgian soil. Around him stretched one of the most formidable armoured spearheads the Wehrmacht had ever assembled for Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Ardennes offensive. 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's most elite Waffen-SS soldiers, all immobilized, paralyzed by the simplest enemy of all, an empty fuel tank. The sight was almost surreal. The vehicles frozen in place, their engines dead, their tracks biting into the frost-hardened earth, waiting like statues in an eerie dawn stillness. Through the thin morning mist, Peiper could make out the deserted American position ahead. Honsfeld, vital supply depot once held by the US 99th Infantry Division. The Americans had retreated in such haste that fire still burned in overturned oil drums. Coffee still steamed in tin mugs, and just beyond, lined up neatly as if offered by fate itself, stood row upon row of jerry cans. Thousands of them. The olive-drab American fuel containers gleamed in the dim light like treasures scattered by the gods of war. The sheer scale of the find left Peiper momentarily speechless. He approached cautiously, almost reverently, taking in every detail. His adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Grüner, pried one open and inhaled deeply. "Benzin high octane," he said, his voice tinged with both relief and awe. Within minutes, Peiper's men were frantically refueling their stalled machines, hoses sloshing with fuel as the first Tiger engines roared to life, breaking the silence of the Ardennes forest with deep, throaty growls. Peiper paced among the stacks of fuel, counting obsessively. The math was staggering, some 50,000 gallons of fuel. Enough to propel his entire Kampfgruppe all the way to the Meuse River. Enough, perhaps, to shift the course of the entire Ardennes offensive. The Americans had abandoned more gasoline here than most German divisions had received in 6 months. And yet, while his men worked, a grim realization settled over Peiper, like the persistent morning fog. If the Americans could leave behind such vast reserves without a second thought, if they could discard what Germany would guard with entire divisions, then the war was already lost. Germany hadn't merely miscalculated. It had fundamentally misunderstood the industrial and logistical might of its enemy. 6 months earlier, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had presented the Führer with a report that should have ended all major offensives on the spot. Allied bombers had systematically destroyed Germany's synthetic fuel plants, the lifeblood of the Wehrmacht. The Lunar Works, which had produced 175,000 tons of fuel in April, yielded only 5,000 tons by September. The hydrogenation plants at Blechhammer Brucks and Pörlitz were running at less than 10% capacity. Germany's war machine was effectively running on fumes. The numbers painted a bleak picture: inevitable defeat. In 1944, the United States produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, counting every drop from its synthetic plants and captured Romanian fields, produced only 33 million barrels, less than 2% of American output. The Third Reich was attempting to wage a fully mechanized war with supply lines barely adequate for horse-drawn logistics. While America's armies drowned in petroleum, Major Friedrich Simon of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Command had calculated that the Ardennes offensive would require 4.5 million gallons of fuel to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 5 million, but due to Allied air raids and damaged transport routes, barely half of it arrived at the front. Germany's entire strategy now depended on seizing enemy supplies, a desperate gamble that exposed weakness rather than strength. Meanwhile, the Americans had constructed an immense logistical network. The Pluto system, pipeline under the ocean, snaked fuel across the channel. while the Red Ball Express, a convoy operation of unprecedented scale, delivered 12,500 tons of supplies daily to the front. By December 1944, US forces in Europe were consuming 1.2 million gallons per day and still receiving 1.4 million, stockpiling reserves even while engaged in active combat. Peiper understood the implications. At just 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, decorated with the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords. A veteran of the Eastern Front, he had learned that in modern warfare, fuel was often more valuable than ammunition. His Kampfgruppe had been designated the Schwerpunkt, the decisive spearhead of the Ardennes assault. 2 days before the attack, on December 14th, Peiper had attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th SS Panzer Army, was blunt. "You will have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies." Peiper's allocation was only 31,000 gallons, enough for roughly 50 miles of combat. The Meuse lay 65 miles away. Failure was embedded in the plan from the outset. Before advancing on December 16th, Peiper issued strict orders. Tanks would drive in single file to conserve fuel. Engines would be shut down for any halt longer than 5 minutes. Capturing American fuel depots would take precedence over all tactical objectives. Discipline was critical. Any deviation could spell disaster. The contrast with American logistics was stark. That same morning, Captain James Rose of the US 743rd Tank Battalion, stationed only 20 miles from Peiper's starting position, recorded in his diary, received fuel resupply 8,000 gallons. Third delivery this week, storage tanks already full. December 16, 1944, 05:30 hours. The German artillery barrage that opened Operation Watch on the Rhine unleashed more shells in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had used in some entire campaigns earlier in the war. Yet even this overwhelming firepower masked the true state of affairs. Critical shortages ran through every unit. Invisible but deadly. Peiper's column finally rolled out at 07 hours, already behind schedule. Roads that appeared as highways on German maps were narrow, muddy lanes, often unpaved, twisting through the dense Ardennes forest. Within hours, traffic jams developed as the heavily armored tanks, designed for the Russian steppes, struggled to negotiate the constrained lanes. At Lanzerath, his first objective, Peiper encountered unexpected resistance, a single American reconnaissance platoon of only 18 men. Those 18 soldiers stalled the most powerful armored formation in Europe for nearly 10 hours. During the standoff, engines idled, burning precious fuel. Frozen exhaust smoke curled into the grey sky above. When his column finally broke through and reached Honsfeld at dawn on December 17th, it had advanced only 20 miles, already consuming 40% of its fuel. At this pace, the Meuse was out of reach. The captured depot was not even a primary facility, merely a forward supply point for the US 99th Infantry Division, classified as a Class 3B temporary fuel station. Yet the quantities found there dwarfed the monthly fuel allotment of an entire German panzer division. Hauptsturmführer Hans Grüner later recalled, "We found pyramids of jerry cans, each 5 gallons, stacked 3 meters high and stretching for hundreds of meters. The Americans hadn't even attempted to destroy them. The fuel itself was high-octane aviation gasoline, mixed with 80-octane motor fuel, far beyond what German engines were designed to handle. The temperamental Maybach engines in Tiger tanks, rated for 74-octane fuel, occasionally faltered when using the purer American fuel." As refueling continued, more revelations emerged. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann, fluent in English from his pre-war trade experience, discovered shipping manifests inside the depot office. The documents traced the fuel's incredible journey, refined in Texas, shipped to New York, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, then across the Channel to Normandy and trucked 400 miles to Honsfeld, all in under 6 weeks. "I showed them to Obersturmbannführer Peiper," Hoffmann recalled in a 1976 interview. He read them twice, crumpled them, and said nothing. But his face went pale. We both understood the implications immediately. Nearby, Private Ernst Kara uncovered a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers dated December 15th, only 2 days old. The headline announced the opening of a new fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun. Capable of delivering 300,000 gallons per day, a single pipeline, providing more fuel in one day than Peiper's entire Kampfgruppe would consume throughout the entire Ardennes offensive. The enormity of the American logistical advantage settled over Peiper like the winter fog, chilling him to the bone, even as his men refueled their tanks and prepared to move forward. To truly grasp the magnitude of Peiper's shock, one must understand the dire fuel situation Germany faced by late 1944. Since May, relentless Allied bombing raids had slashed synthetic fuel production by roughly 90%. The Luftwaffe was grounding planes en masse for lack of aviation fuel. Pilot training programs were slashed from 250 flight hours to a mere 60 hours. The Kriegsmarine surface fleet had all but ceased operations. U-boats were fitted with snorkels, extending battery usage to conserve diesel. On the home front, German civilians had not seen private automobile traffic since 1942. Gasoline was so precious that the Gestapo investigated theft of individual liters on the black market. Farmers reverted to horse-drawn plows, and everyday life was governed by scarcity. Meanwhile, the United States produced 67% of the world's oil. Alone, the East Texas oil fields generated more petroleum than all of occupied Europe combined. American refineries were operating at maximum capacity. And Standard Oil even experimented with new byproducts simply because crude oil was abundant beyond need. With the 50,000 gallons captured at Honsfeld, Peiper's columns surged forward. By noon on December 17th, they reached Bullingen, securing additional supplies, rations, ammunition, and, most importantly, maps detailing other American fuel depots in the region. Yet the maps revealed a stark reality. Fuel stockpiles were everywhere. Every major crossroads had a depot, and the US First Army alone held 3.5 million gallons in reserve. Peiper pressed on to Ligneville, where his forces would commit the Malmedy massacre, killing 84 American prisoners, a war crime driven in part by fuel scarcity. Peiper later argued he could not spare gasoline to transport the captives. By evening on December 17th, Peiper's spearhead reached Stavelot, the site of a major American fuel depot holding over 2 million gallons. Here lay enough fuel to guarantee reaching the Meuse, but the Americans were already taking action. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had received word of the German advance. His orders were clear: deny fuel to the enemy at all costs. The Stavelot depot held 2,189,000 gallons of gasoline in jerry cans spread across 15 acres. At 16:30 hours, as Peiper's vanguard approached, Brewster gave the command. Engineers doused the stacks with gasoline trails and distributed white phosphorus grenades. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis threw the first grenade. The explosion was instantaneous and immense. A wall of fire shot upwards, easily 100 feet. Within minutes, the entire depot was engulfed in flames. Peiper's lead tanks arrived to witness a pillar of black smoke rising 1,000 feet into the sky. The fire would burn for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered Peiper's entire division to Antwerp and back. Werner later described the scene. Peiper stood silently on his tank turret, watching the inferno. After perhaps 5 minutes, he climbed down and muttered, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons just to deny it to us. What are we doing here?" Across the Ardennes, American engineers systematically destroyed fuel depots rather than risk capture. At Peiper, 1.1 million gallons went up in flames. At Spa, 2.5 million were destroyed. During the first week alone, Americans deliberately burned more than 8 million gallons, far exceeding what Germany had allocated for the entire offensive. This ability to casually incinerate millions of gallons stemmed from a logistical system beyond German comprehension. The Red Ball Express alone moved 412,000 tons of supplies using 6,000 trucks running around the clock. Each truck consumed 40 gallons daily. The operation burned more fuel than Army Group B received monthly. By December 1944, the U.S. Motor Transport Service operated 230 truck companies on color-coded routes, delivering 20,000 tons of supplies each day, including 3,000 tons of fuel. Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for the First Army, recorded on December 18th, fuel receipts 1,847,000 gallons, fuel issued 1,623,000 gallons, net gain to reserves 224,000 gallons. The pipeline system further amplified capacity. Operation Pluto pumped 1 million gallons daily from Britain. Pipelines across France, including Cherbourg-Paris at 800,000 gallons daily and the Seine line at 650,000, supplemented delivery. By December 1944, Allied forces in northwest Europe were consuming 7.5 million gallons per day while receiving 8.2 million, building reserves even during active offensives. As Peiper pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18th, the impossibility of the German position became painfully clear. At Stoumont, another depot fell into German hands. 5,000 gallons captured, but over 3 hours of combat had already consumed more. Tiger tanks burned 2.5 gallons per mile in battle. Panthers, 1.5. In Ardennes terrain, consumption increased by 40%. Otto Dingler, maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded, "By noon, December 18th, we had consumed 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We captured perhaps 55,000. We were running a deficit." American intelligence, monitoring German communications via ultra-intercepts, understood Peiper's precarious fuel situation. General Courtney Hodges issued orders. Enemy critically short of fuel. Destroy all gasoline stocks threatened by capture. That same day, American C-47s flew 316 sorties to Bastogne, delivering 160,000 gallons of fuel, more than Peiper's entire Kampfgruppe possessed. By December 19th, as Peiper engaged defenders at Stoumont, the fuel crisis had reached critical levels. Tanks were abandoned with empty fuel tanks, not due to battle damage. Peiper consolidated remaining supplies, perhaps 8,000 gallons, enough for one engagement or retreat, but not both. Allied planners were already preparing January operations. Brigadier General Maurice Gilland requested 245 million gallons for the coming month, approved without question. The contrast went beyond quantity. American vehicles were standardized for efficiency. Shermans consumed 0.8 gallons per mile versus Tigers at 2.5. Trucks averaged 8 miles per gallon, fully loaded. Parts were interchangeable, maintenance simplified. German forces struggled with a bewildering array of vehicles with differing fuel, oil, and parts requirements. French tanks required different oil than German Panthers. Soviet trucks required parts not available to German Opel models. Each discrepancy multiplied logistical headaches. On December 20th, Peiper received a radio message. Fuel convoy destroyed by Allied aircraft. No resupply possible. Continue with available resources. He gathered his commanders. Sternsturmführer Vera Pertka was blunt. Fuel for perhaps 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 away. According to testimony, Peiper declared, "Gentlemen, we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we received for this entire operation. What we captured at Honsfeld, which seemed miraculous, was nothing to them. We cannot win." This realization spread quickly. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, later wrote, "When I learned the Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons, rather than risk our capturing it, I knew the offensive had failed before it began." Colonel Friedrich von Denner, captured December 23rd, told interrogators, "Your soldiers throw away chocolate. My men haven't seen chocolate in 2 years. You burn millions of gallons. We measure by the liter. How can we fight such abundance?" By December 21st, Peiper was surrounded at L'Église. Tanks immobile, German units encircled by American forces, including the 31st Infantry, 82nd Airborne, and 3rd Armored Division. Their combined fuel allocation for December 21st alone was 340,000 gallons. Peiper had perhaps 1,000. Private First Class. Richard McKinney wrote home, "We've got Germans surrounded who ran out of gas. Our captain jokes we use more fuel heating coffee than they have for tanks." The Americans demonstrated industrial warfare at its peak. Patton's Third Army redeployed 350,000 gallons in 3 days, a feat impossible by German standards. On December 23rd, clear weather allowed Allied aircraft to fly 2,000 sorties, consuming fuel at rates that would have grounded the Luftwaffe for weeks. P-47s burned 300 gallons per hour, B-26s 200. A single day's air operations consumed more than Germany's entire offensive allocation. On the night of December 23rd to 24th, Peiper abandoned his vehicles and escaped on foot. Of 119 tanks and assault guns that had begun the offensive, only 39 remained, operational but immobilized. These vehicles were destroyed along with their remaining ammunition. Obersturmführer Heinz Gols recalled the scene in grim detail. "We drained the last fuel from all the vehicles, maybe 200 gallons in total. The Obersturmbannführer personally destroyed his command tank. Millions of Reichsmarks of equipment were obliterated, all because of empty fuel tanks. Of the 5,000 men who had set out with Kampfgruppe Peiper, only about 770 ever returned. They had advanced 60 miles, captured several depots, and, above all, discovered the stark reality of Allied logistics." Word of Peiper's findings spread quickly through the German command. On December 26th, Field Marshal Walter Model received detailed reports on the captured American supplies. His chief of staff recorded Model's reaction. The Field Marshal read the figures twice: 50,000 gallons at Hunsfeld, 2 million burned at Stavelot, 8 million destroyed rather than captured. "We are not fighting the same war," he reportedly said. By December 28th, Hitler refused to accept reality. Albert Speer later wrote, "The Führer insisted the numbers were propaganda. Even when shown photographs of the burning Stavelot depot, he claimed it was some Hollywood trick. Yet lower-ranking officers understood the truth." SS officer Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote to his wife, "The Americans destroy more fuel in a single day than we receive in an entire month. They operate tanks like we march on foot. This war is lost." The fuel crisis was emblematic of a larger, unavoidable truth. By 1944, the United States produced 50% of the world's manufactured goods. New aircraft rolled off an assembly line every 5 minutes, a ship launched daily, a tank every 7 minutes. Petroleum statistics were even more staggering. The United States refined 1.8 billion barrels, the Soviet Union 110 million, Germany, including synthetic production, 33 million, and Japan 2.6 million. Combined, the Axis produced less than 2% of American petroleum output. Every major German offensive after 1942 had been hampered by fuel shortages. Conversely, every American offensive was backed by industrial abundance that German planners could scarcely comprehend. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Hansen documented a striking incident on December 27th. A logistics officer reported that bad weather had reduced fuel deliveries to just 500,000 gallons daily. Initially, concern was raised, but someone noted that this alone exceeded Germany's total allocation for the entire offensive. German prisoners from the Ardennes campaign were astonished by American waste. Watching US soldiers discard half-eaten rations or use gasoline for heating shattered morale far more than any artillery barrage. Oberst Gar Reichholm told interrogators, "We knew your production numbers in theory, but seeing soldiers waste more than we possessed made the reality hit home. Every German who witnessed such casual abundance knew the war was hopeless." This knowledge spread despite censorship. Feldwebel Ernst Müller wrote, "Americans wash clothes in gasoline. They feed chocolate to dogs. They fire artillery for Christmas. We cannot fight infinity." The psychological impact was devastating. It undermined the Nazi narrative of racial and cultural superiority. How could decadent Americans wield such wealth while the master race scraped by for necessities? During the Nuremberg trials, German leaders repeatedly cited logistics, particularly fuel, as the decisive factor in their defeat. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt testified, "We had operational superiority in 1940-41. By 1944, we could not move our forces due to fuel shortages, while Americans moved entire armies like chess pieces." Peiper's testimony regarding the Malmedy massacre was revealing. Every decision after December 17th had been constrained by fuel shortages. We could neither maneuver, pursue, nor retreat effectively. "The Americans moved freely while we counted liters," he admitted. General Heinz Guderian observed, "When Peiper captured 50,000 gallons, everything. To him, but nothing to the Americans. The war was effectively over." The story endures, because it marks the moment industrial warfare reached its apex. Wars were no longer won by valor alone, but by production capacity. The romantic notion of the heroic battlefield died in the Ardennes, among abandoned vehicles and empty fuel tanks. Historian Dr. Richard Overy calculated that by 1944, Allied to Axis production ratios exceeded 5.1 in most major categories. In petroleum, the ratio approached 50.1. These advantages could not be countered by superior training or tactics. Production statistics were staggering. The US built 324,750 aircraft during the war. Germany, 119,970. American factories produced 88,010 tanks. Germany, 46,857. Most critically, in petroleum alone, the US refined 1.8 billion barrels in 1944, while Germany scraped together only 33 million dough. On December 24, 1944, as Peiper's men slipped through American lines on foot, abandoning 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 177 other vehicles, the truth became undeniable. They had captured 50,000 gallons at Honsfeld, a seemingly miraculous haul, but it was meaningless to an enemy who could casually destroy millions. Peiper later reflected in 1975. That morning at Honsfeld, finding American fuel, we celebrated like winning the lottery. By evening, seeing Stavelot burning, we realized we'd already lost. Americans had so much they could destroy what we would have died to possess. 50,000 gallons, that was less than a single American armored division consumed in 2 days, less than the Red Ball Express burned in 3 hours. It was a rounding error in Allied daily consumption. Major General J.L. Collins wrote later, German attempts to seize fuel revealed a fundamental miscalculation. They assumed fuel was as precious to us as it was to them. They could not comprehend that we had so much we could burn millions rather than risk tactical disadvantage. Operation Watch on the Rhine failed due to the immutable mathematics of industrial warfare. During the Ardennes offensive, the Germans consumed roughly 2.8 million gallons, 40% of their total allocation, while the Americans consumed 267 million gallons, nearly 100 times more. The Wehrmacht lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, and 1,000 aircraft. But the most devastating loss was one of perception. Every German who witnessed American abundance understood that Germany was not fighting a war, it was participating in its own execution. Peiper survived imprisonment until 1956 for war crimes. On July 14, 1976, he was murdered at his home in France by unknown assailants. Yet in 1967, he told historian Henry Lehman, finding that depot was the worst moment. Had we run out earlier, we might have retreated with some dignity. Instead, we discovered the Americans had oceans of fuel while we had drops. We discovered impossibility. The lesson extends beyond World War II. In industrial warfare, logistics outweighs tactics, production overwhelms courage, and abundance defeats dedication. The German soldier of 1944, arguably better trained and more experienced, could not compete. Americans were backed by an industrial machine capable of wasting more than Germany could ever produce. This truth was written in every jerrycan at Honsfeld, every gallon burned at Stavelot, every pipeline snaking across France. Wars between industrial powers would be decided by factories and refineries, not brilliant generals. Colonel Trevor Dupree calculated that in December 1944, each American soldier was supported by 67 pounds of supplies daily, while each German soldier received just 3. Americans complained about waste. Germans would have considered such abundance unimaginable. In 1984, 40 years after the battle, veterans gathered at L'Église. The museum displayed Peiper's Tiger tank, still positioned where it had run out of fuel on December 23, 1944. Former Unterarzt Karl Wortmann stood beside the tank with staff. Sergeant Roy Anderson of the 30th Infantry. Division, we always wondered why you stopped, Anderson said. We thought it was tactical. Wortmann laughed bitterly. We stopped because the tanks were empty. You burned millions to keep it from us. How could we fight that? Anderson was quiet for a moment, then admitted, we never realized you were that short. We had so much, we never thought about it. That exchange captured the stark reality of December 1944. One side measured by the gallon, the other by millions. One fought for every jerry can. The other could burn oceans. The outcome was predetermined. German records are damning. Army Group B's War Diary notes, December 16th, offensive begins, fuel at 70% of minimum. December 17th, Peiper captures 50,000 gallons. December 18th, multiple depots destroyed, over 5 million gallons lost. December 19th, fuel critical, units immobilized. December 24th, Peiper abandons vehicles due to fuel exhaustion. Meanwhile, First Army reports December 16th reserves 3.7 million gallons. December 17th, 2.2 million destroyed. December 18th, 1.8 million received. December 24th, reserves 4.1 million. Americans treated millions with indifference. Germans reserved every individual can. Beyond quantity, American fuel represented technological superiority. American refineries perfected catalytic cracking, producing higher octane gasoline far more efficiently than German hydrogenation plants. Their 100-octane aviation fuel gave planes unmatched performance compared to German aircraft running 87-octane synthetics. Every empty German tank and every burned depot told the same story. Industrial power decided the war. American engineers had perfected fuel additives Germany could not replicate: tetraethyl, ethylene, diaramide detergents. German engines designed for lower quality fuel often ran erratically on captured American gasoline. Across the Ardennes, fuel shortages dictated every soldier's experience. SS officer Hans Müller recorded on December 20th, "We marched 30 kilometers. No fuel for our trucks. Engines of abandoned American vehicles still ran to provide warmth. We marched through snow while engines burned. Medical services were crippled by the shortage. Ambulances could not evacuate wounded soldiers, and hospitals lacked fuel for generators. Men who could have survived with minimal transport instead died waiting." Oberarzt Dr. Wilhelm Kirsting later testified, "We had excellent surgeons and supplies captured from Americans, but no fuel for ambulances." Men died who could have been saved with just 10 kilometers of transport. These discoveries shattered the myth propagated by German propaganda that Americans were soft and incapable. Soldiers realized that the Americans could destroy resources far exceeding anything Germany possessed. SS officer Goebbels wrote in his diary on December 28th, "Reports indicate serious morale problems. Soldiers write about American superiority, undermining our narrative. Yet no censorship could prevent the truth from spreading." The myth of German superiority could not survive first-hand encounters with American logistics. The failure of the Ardennes offensive left Germany with no strategic options except desperate defense. General Jodl testified at Nuremberg, "After the Ardennes, we knew it was lost. We had played our last card, only to find the enemy held all the aces." Recognizing German desperation, the Allies focused on systematically destroying fuel production. By February 1945, German fuel production had ceased entirely. The Luftwaffe was grounded, pilot training cancelled, and the Wehrmacht became static, destroyed piecemeal by a mobile, well-supplied enemy. Spring 1945 brought surreal images across the German lines. Entire panzer divisions surrendered not due to battlefield defeat, but because they could not move. General Major Fritz Bohlin described, "We had 42 operational tanks, experienced crews, ammunition, and 300 liters of fuel, not enough to reach the next town. We destroyed our tanks and walked to captivity." Meanwhile, the American advance was constrained only by congestion from their abundance of vehicles. Patton's Third Army alone had 15,000 trucks and armored vehicles. Kampfgruppe. Peiper's fuel crisis exemplifies how industrial capacity determined the outcome of World War II. That December morning at Honsfeld, standing among captured jerrycans, Peiper glimpsed a stark truth. They were fighting an enemy whose waste exceeded their entire need. The numbers speak for themselves. German allocation for the offensive, 5 million gallons. Fuel destroyed by Americans to deny capture, 8 million gallons. Daily American consumption, 7.5 million gallons. Peiper's capture at Honsfeld, 50,000 gallons, just 0.6% of the American daily supply. The Battle of the Bulge claimed roughly $19,000 American lives and perhaps 100,000 German, decimating Germany's final reserves. Yet the most enduring effect was psychological. German soldiers across the front now understood that America possessed incomprehensible abundance. Peiper's discovery was not merely about fuel, it revealed the true nature of industrial warfare. Victory belonged to the nation that could produce the most petroleum, steel, and aluminum. Germany never stood a chance. The final irony was revealed when American forces catalogued abandoned German equipment at La Glaise. 39 pristine Tiger tanks had been left behind solely due to lack of fuel. Major Robert Harrison's salvage report noted, fuel required 8,000 gallons. Classification, minimal. Source, local reserve. Time, 4 hours. What was impossible for the Germans, to save their most powerful vehicles, was negligible to Americans, easily supplied from local reserves exceeding Kampfgruppe Peiper's peak strength. this was Peiper's revelation at Honsfeld, it was not just that the Americans had more fuel, but that their industrial abundance operated on a scale that rendered German scarcity irrelevant. The war was effectively over the moment American industrial capacity mobilized. Honsfeld revealed what had been true since 1942. Germany had been fighting the impossible, measuring defeat in gallons while America measured victory in oceans. Today, Peiper's Tiger tank sits in the L'Église Museum, its fuel gauge permanently empty, a monument to the moment when tactical excellence met logistical reality and lost. Visitors often ask why such powerful machines were abandoned. The answer is simple: there was no fuel.